Hi, my name is Emily Culver, and in this short teaching demo, I will introduce a concept that is central to critical historical thinking, presentism. In this lesson, I help students think more deeply about how we interpret the past and to challenge quick moralizing conclusions that ignore historical context by defining presentism, providing examples, modeling critical historical thinking, and finally assigning a project that will help students apply the lessons from this class. So let's start out here with a definition. Presentism is the uncritical adherence to present day attitudes. So especially in cases where we interpret past events or people. And the key word here really is uncritical. That means that we are skipping context and instead using today's values to judge the past. A presentist interpretation is often very easy or it's obvious, but these interpretations, presentist interpretations, are usually superficial and unfair. All right, so let's think a little bit about why presentism matters. So presentism matters because it distorts our understanding of history. It replaces real context with quick judgment. When we apply our modern values, today's values, to the past without examining what or why people believed what they did or what choices were available to them, we risk understanding the deeper reasons behind people's actions in the past. Presentism also blocks historical empathy. Historical empathy is our ability to understand people on their own terms. Historical empathy does not mean excusing injustice. It means that we are curious about what shaped people's decisions in the past and how or why their worldview was different from our own worldview. Presentism also confuses understanding with approval. Just because we understand the actions of someone from the past does not mean that we uncritically agree with those actions. So let's take a look here at some examples. So first of all, before the Reformation in Europe, the Catholic Church sold indulgences. These were permissions, essentially, that people could pay for in exchange for forgiveness of their sins. At the same time, all across Europe in the Middle Ages, clergy were overwhelmingly extremely wealthy, while the majority of people lived in extreme poverty, really destitute conditions. So a presentist might look at this situation, the opulent clergy, the indulgences, and their reaction might say, this is obviously corrupt. How would anybody fall for this? But a historian would ask, what role was religion playing in everyday life? What did people at this time period believe about sin, salvation, and the afterlife? How were spiritual and economic structures connected? To understand this period, to understand why indulgences existed, we need to know why they made sense in that concept, in that context. Why were indulgences accepted? Why were they maybe even comforting to people? And that doesn't mean that we agree with the practice, but we're trying to understand how and why indulgences existed in that time. That's what critical historical thinking looks like, versus presentist arguments, which would simply say this is an obviously corrupt and wrong practice that was hurting people and was corrupt and went against what the Catholic Church said it believed in or what it preached. So what I just modeled here was the difference between understanding and agreeing. So understanding a historical event or a historical practice is not the same as approving that practice or that process. So studying a past belief or studying a past institution deeply doesn't mean that we are excusing it. It just means we're trying to explain it, we're trying to understand it before we evaluate it. Let's try another example here. So child labor in the United States in the 1800s. All across the US, kids worked very long hours in very dangerous conditions, sometimes 12 hours or 10 or 12 hours a day. A presentist might look at that situation and say, those children's parents were abusive. Why would they allow that? But a historian would say, what options did working class families really have? What was the economy like? And what alternatives existed for working class children? Understanding those conditions, understanding those pressures, doesn't mean that we support or condone child labor. It means that we can interpret the situation more fairly and accurately. So let's talk about how we as historians avoid presentism, now that we understand what presentism is and have some examples of presentism. So first of all, we slow down. Instead of jumping immediately to judgment, we move through a process. So this is a 4-step process. Our first step is observation. What actually happened? What does the evidence show? This probably looks like us looking at our sources, our primary sources, to help us better understand what actually happened in the process, the event, or with the person that we are studying. Step 2 is context. What were the norms, the values, or the conditions that shaped people's decisions? Step 3 is interpretation. How did people at that time understand their world and their actions? And step 4 is evaluation. Only after we've built context and understanding do we evaluate or critique. This 4-step model can help us approach history thoughtfully. It gives us a method for asking better questions and constructing more meaningful insights. So let's move to an assignment. So our assignment for today is to choose a historical figure that has been perhaps the subject of recent public debate. Some examples are Christopher Columbus, Thomas Jefferson, or Marie Antoinette. You're able to check in with me if you have another example that you would like to use. So research the historical context in which they lived and write a 1 to 2 paragraph reflection on how presentism might shape our judgment of that historical person and how a historian might approach their actions differently. Let's apply the 4-step model on slide 7. So thank you very much for listening to my teaching demo. I'd love to end with a quote. The historian must get inside the minds of the people who made history. I think that gives us some food for thought about the challenges of presentism and how we as historians must work against it. Thank you very much.